Whinery of Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities, here to go through the Word and discuss your Bible questions. If you have questions for Pastor Steve, please send them to me, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can also text or leave a voicemail to 707-872-7677. If you're listening on the radio, welcome. So glad that you're tuning in. The reason Steve is laughing because I always say if you're watching on the radio and make myself look dumb before we try and look smart with your Bible questions. In any case, you guys that are watching on social media, just post in the comments. We'll try to get to you as fast as we can. I save all these for the next show if not. For you guys that are local, I do have an announcement that Christy wanted me to tell you guys, and that is that Pastor Steve is going to be going through marriage. I'm assuming that's because that's where we're at in 1 Peter. Mm-hmm. And so, husbands, invite your wives, come on out, be blessed by the word in your marriages. It's going to be a great time. On that note, we have 3 services on Sunday morning. We have a 7:30, 9:15, and 11 o'clock currently in our sanctuary. Subject to change, we do go to the outdoor amphitheater during summer services. And so in the coming weeks, when that happens, there'll be some changes there. But nonetheless, that's where we're at for right now. And then on Wednesday and Sunday evening, we have a 6:30 service. We would love to have you come out and join us if you're looking for a fellowship, or if you just want to come to church and hang out with us, we would like that as well. I don't have anything else to announce unless you have something, Steve.
Nope.
All right. I'm going to jump in to Elizabeth's question that we didn't get to last week before I start the other ones. And Elizabeth says this: does the Bible say that the unbelievers will not be raised with a body? I heard a pastor say this, and I looked up some scriptures and can't find a scripture that says that they will be raised with a body. Some of the scriptures I look up, Daniel 12, Revelation 20, and Matthew 10. Thanks for all you do. It's appreciated. Pastor Steve, what do you say to this question? Elizabeth.
John chapter 5. Jesus says this, this is in John chapter 5, starting in verse 26, just to give you some context. It says, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he's the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who've done evil to the resurrection of condemnation." And so there's a resurrection of the just and there's a resurrection of the unjust. In fact, that's how it's divided throughout the New Testament. You don't resurrect a spirit. And so they have bodies. There are spiritual bodies that are given to these people, just like Jesus's body. What's kind of wild about this whole thing is that when you're talking about the resurrection of unbelievers, well, first off, this is what happens when a believer dies. When a believer dies, they go immediately into the presence of the Lord. And so you have that found in Luke chapter 16 and 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Luke 16 is before the resurrection. 2 Corinthians 5 is after the resurrection. They are aware and alive immediately after their death. And one of the things that you have to understand about death in the Bible and just death in general is that death is, the teaching in Scripture is not that death is a ceasing to exist. Death is a separation. And so in physical death, you're separated from your body. And so James says, just like the spirit without the body is dead, so faith without works is dead also. And so, or the body without the spirit, excuse me. And so when you die, your spirit leaves your body, and there's a separation there, and that's death. In the resurrection, you're not resurrecting spirits. The spirits are brought back by Jesus in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and reunited with their bodies, and that's the resurrection. And so when you're talking about a resurrection, that's a resurrection of the body. For an unbeliever, when they die, they wake up in torment. And that's in Luke 16. That's where Jesus talked about the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man woke up in torment. And so it wasn't a ceasing to exist, his death. And it's the same thing for unbelievers now. They wake up in torment. They're being punished. It's kind of like jail until the last judgment. And in the last judgment, there's a resurrection. And so the unbelieving dead are resurrected and they stand before the Lord in heaven. And you read about that at the end of Revelation chapter 20. And then they're judged, and then they're cast in the lake of fire at that point. But there's a resurrection of the unbelievers. So I don't know where the pastor got that, but that's not the teaching in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you can't answer this, but what are your thoughts? Why do you think that when unbelievers go to hell, eternity without the Lord, that they continue on forever? And obviously you have the secularists that attack, oh, how could a loving God make someone suffer for eternity? But do you think it's tied to that we're made in the image of God, and it has to do with our makeup as far as a soul that somehow continues on? Or
Well, sure, and again, the conflict here and the misunderstanding that people have is that when you die, you cease to exist. There is no ceasing to exist.
right.
And so the warnings in Scripture about rejecting Christ is because the penalty for doing that, the consequences for doing that are so extreme. And it's not God that is relegating these people to eternal torment. It's they themselves.
Right.
And the eternal torment is something it's not even set up by God. It's the idea of God granting them everything that they want, and what they want is to be without God.
Yeah.
And so God gives them what they want. The problem is you're made to be in the presence of God, and you're living in a world that glorifies God in the sense that He made this world, and even though it's fallen, there's all kinds of good things that we have. We can breathe, we can eat, and we have pleasure on all kinds of levels, and that's set into this world, and it's part of the nature of God to do that. God is love. And so you're experiencing right now the love of God in the fact that you're in an environment that fits you. And when a person dies and ends up in the lake of fire, they're in an environment that doesn't fit them, because the Bible says that we were made to be in His presence, and for His pleasure we are created. It's the idea that we're created to please God, and God's there to bless us, and it's this mutual love relationship that's going to go on in heaven forever. And if you don't want that, God's not going to make you. The only problem with that is what you're asking for is a place without God. And so God is light. In Him there's no darkness at all. And so you're going to a place that's outer darkness because you don't want to have anything to do with God. In God's presence is fullness of joy. And so you're going to go to a place where there is none, because you don't want to have anything to do with God. At His right hand are pleasures forevermore. And so you're going to go to a place where there is no pleasure. Absence of pleasure is pain. And so you're going to a place where there's nothing but pain. And again, it's because you're out of your environment. You were made to be in the presence of God. Jesus said that God made the lake of fire for the devil and his angels. And we use the term lake of fire. I don't want to minimize that in the sense of saying that there is no lake of fire and it's all symbolic and stuff, because I have no idea.
Right.
It could literally be a lake of fire as far as I know. But the point of the lake of fire is that it's awful. That's the point. And I can't think of anything that I would rather not do, rather not do than go jump in a lake that's burning.
Yeah. That's like the most horrendous way to die.
Yeah. And you wouldn't die.
And
you'd float there, burning.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
That it's awful, and you don't want to go there. And so, if the lake of fire is symbolic, one of the things you need to understand about symbols in the Bible is that the reality is much more intense. Whether you're talking about symbols where you're talking about heaven is, streets of gold, and I could care less about streets of gold. The point is, it's beautiful beyond imagining.
Right.
And so hell is awful beyond imagining. And again, it's because of that absence of God's revealed presence to people who don't want Him. So Again, if you're an unbeliever and you're griping about the fact that God's going to sit there and torture you forever, he's not. He's just not going to be there, and that's going to be your torture.
Yeah.
And so, more power to you if that's what you want. I don't want that, and hopefully you don't. So.
Yeah, when I did my first real study on hell, it was fascinating to make that discovery, because coming out of the world, when you read, there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You picture like these demons tormenting you and punishing you, and it's like this, it's what the world makes hell, is this place of punishment. But like you said, all it is the absence of God. So the reason that there's weeping and gnashing of teeth is because the opposite of pleasure is pain and suffering, like you said. It's just he's not there, and all that stuff takes place, but it's because he's not there.
Right. He's not there, and there's nothing there that reflects him.
Right.
And so it's not the absence of God with the pleasure of his creation.
Yeah.
It's the absence of God and anything that reflects him.
Yeah.
And
there's when you're talking about the darkness, whatever, it's like this spiritual darkness that's even blacker than, it's not just that it's dark, it's like the spiritual blackness.
Yeah. It's like you're just going to be alone, suffering by yourself. So you're not going to have any buddies in hell. It's like none of that's happening. You're just alone and suffering forever because you're outside of the place that God designed you. And let me put it this way. When fish don't know how good they have it until you take them out of the water, and then all of a sudden they're doing this, whoa, and they're having a real problem, and it's because they're out of their element. And that's not even comparable. That's a simile that doesn't even get close to what we're talking about. But it's a good picture of what's happening there. And so, if you want to be without God, God's going to grant your request, and you're going to regret it. You're going to regret the request. So
yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, don't be that guy.
Okay, question, assuming you've been reading the news or following up on this, but is it true that Roe versus Wade is being overturned? And what does that mean for Washington State? So apparently there was a leaked document, and then one of the Supreme Court justices confirmed that it was actually a legit document. And apparently we're going through with this. Do you know anything? Have you been reading anything on this?
I've been following it. One of the things that John Roberts, he's the Chief Justice, said is that they're not done with their deliberations on this and their voting and all that kind of stuff. And so we don't know that that's where it is at this point. Not for sure, but it sure looks like it.
Yeah.
And so Roe v. Wade would be gone, and at that point, it goes back to the situation we had in 1973, where it goes back to the states,
right,
and they vote on it. And that's the way that it's supposed to work. That's the way Roe v. Wade has always been a joke. I remember it when I was a kid. And, I'm in junior high at the time, and I was shocked that the Supreme Court went that way, just by the little that I knew about it. And, again, I'm just a kid, but I knew enough about what was going on there to know that this was a ridiculous ruling. There's no such thing as abortion in the Constitution. And a right to privacy doesn't mean that you have the right to, I can invoke a right to privacy for my whole family. I've got a right to privacy. You don't have any business doing anything with my family or having anything to do with them. So I can do what I want with my wife, and I can do what I want with my animals, and I can do what I want with my children. That's the kind of reasoning that you have in this situation. And that is not something that the Constitution has ever been okay with. You don't get to take people out, because of your right to privacy. And so it was a bad ruling in the first place, and everybody's known it since that point. And what the left has tried to do is just make it settled law and that kind of thing. Any reasonable court was always going to overturn this. This is on the same level as slavery in the mid 1800s.
That's a great analogy right there.
Dred Scott, it was always going to be overturned It's called the Dred Scott decision. And that was always going to be overturned because it was bad law.
Yeah.
And that's the case with this situation too. Did I answer that whole thing?
Yeah, so an interesting thing, Mitch talked about this last night, and one thing he pointed out in our men's Bible study, and that's what I'm talking about, is that this is going to bring out the liberal hordes right before the midterms for voting and stuff like that. And then when you look at that, his point was when you have kind of the judgment of God going on right now and the end times and stuff, it's like Lord, why would you allow Roe versus Wade to get overturned now? And you can see with that contrast why spiritually it would bring the people who, like we talked about already, hate God up, like in Sodom and Gomorrah, where they're just overblowing with anger and vile. It's like one of those things that just points to their deprivation.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was an interesting point, but nonetheless, fantastic situation.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool. One of the things, though, is they're talking about passing a law that allows abortion nationwide. It's just going to get struck down.
Right.
You can't pass a law.
Yeah.
They've just ruled it unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So you cannot pass a law, federal law, saying that abortion is okay because the first person who sues on the basis of that law, states' rights, that kind of stuff, they're going to win. And so there will be no law federally okaying abortion. The only way that you can do that is by putting an abortion amendment into the Constitution. And so then you have to go through the whole process of amending the Constitution. You got all the states voting on it, and they're not going to win that either. And so this is going to be a state-by-state thing. I kind of think actually that's cool because it gives God the opportunity to judge the United States state by state.
So I was going to ask you that. Obviously, we live in Washington State. If you guys don't know that are listening on the internet, we live in Washington State. California has already adopted these crazy laws that basically invite people to come have an abortion in their state and they're going all the way to 10 months was the last thing that they proposed after delivery.
28 days after delivery.
28 days. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see the red and blue just getting more divided because obviously the blue states are going to tamp the drums of women's rights and all the other nonsense that comes out of their mouth, and they're going to fight against it, obviously, and now you're going to have red states that are going to embrace this new change?
You just hit a button with me. You pushed a button with me. The whole red state, blue state thing makes me mad.
Yeah.
Because
it's the United States.
Well, it's the United States, but red state, blue state, they specifically, actually during the election of Ronald Reagan, actually his second election, Republicans were the color for Republicans was blue.
Really?
Yeah, it was blue. And so you go through and you look at the map when Reagan got reelected, and it was blue everywhere except for one spot. Was it Mondale? I think it was Mondale. The guy, yeah. Anyway, and so later on, what happened is newsrooms started changing the color so that the Democrats were blue because red is the color of communism. It's the color of leftists.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so they switched colors because they were already red.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to be tagged with that whole thing. It was nothing, that's like a whole political thing. Anyway,
yeah. Well, that was right during the Cold War, so you could see the animosity towards that.
Right, yeah. So anyway, back to, what were you asking me?
Well,
I got off track
The
there.
division that we're going to have now, because Washington and California are going to obviously fight against this, and now you're going to have, whether it's Roe versus Wade, the mandates, you're going to have a huge contrast between the Florida, Texas, and the Washington, Californias.
Right. So what's going to happen is Florida and Texas are they're just going to prosper, and Washington and California and all the red states.
This is gonna be a thing. I know already. We're gonna make T-shirts or something.
All the leftist states are just going to end up, with that group of people and all the stuff that comes with it, and it's going to be awful. So, we're living in a state that's like that. And so it's one of those places that's, it's a place for a mission. It's, our people need Jesus really bad. And so, not that people in Texas don't, but it's our people need Jesus. So Inslee's already come out and said we're gonna remain pro-death,
Of course.
until for his lifetime.
Yeah.
Not my lifetime, he said, and it's like, yeah, you're such a tough guy. In any case, the leftist states are going to go that direction. You're going to see the difference, and so I think that's going to be kind of a cool thing. I'm actually going to watch and see what happens, as far as climate and blessing and prosperity and all that kind of stuff that descends on these states that are pro killing babies versus states that protect children. And you see what happens here. I think it's going to be actually a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that's definitely some great things to see spiritually. Okay, let's do another update. Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, we've been talking about this. It's been in the news. It's not going away. Do you have updates as far as this situation and any thoughts on end times and where this goes?
Well, I've been watching a number of issues on this whole thing, and you have the Russians over and over talking about the fact that they are willing to use nuclear weapons in the case of a conventional attack against them. They're worried about being taken out. An attack that is going to take these guys out of power, and it's something that the United States is talking about. We're talking about regime change in Russia, which is something that Putin 2 years ago said would give him an out for using first strike and nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
If they thought that any attack on the nation was going to be something that was going to be that serious. Let's see. I've actually got a quote that I just used yesterday. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gave a chilling warning. He said the risk of nuclear war is a real one. Speaking to state-run media, Lavrov said the danger is serious, it is real, it cannot be underestimated. He added that he did not want to see these risks of nuclear war artificially inflated. He goes on to say, "We will use nuclear weapons against you and your allies if you don't back off." Basically, that was a phrase that was put into his mouth. But the new policy that the Russians have, and it's existed for 2 years, allows the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional strike. That means some sort of nuclear provocation. Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, who sits on Russia's Security Council, reminded our country of this policy. He warned Joe Biden that Russia would indeed use nuclear weapons against the West in response to any act of aggression that is committed against Russia and its allies. And so we've already done this. We gave intelligence to the Ukrainians so that they could shoot down a troop transport plane. Hundreds of Russian soldiers died in this whole thing, and we were specifically involved in giving them this stuff. And so these guys are talking about stay out of it, and if you get into it and we lose people, there's an attack on us, and it's existential as far as their thinking goes. They feel the freedom to use nukes.
All right, so let me ask you this, because I also heard that within an hour of that statement, I believe it was that one, Biden signed a $33 billion aid deal to help Ukraine in the war effort, like almost as a poke in the face. Why do you think these guys don't take their statements serious? And if you know anything about foreign policy, you see that when Putin talks about regime change, it unites Russia around that cause, even though they don't like what Putin's doing. And we're so done with our foreign policy that we're just helping him.
I think they think that Putin is just like them. They say things all the time that they have no intention of carrying out.
So they think he's just bluffing.
Yeah, they think he's just talking. And one of the crazy things about this whole situation is that they keep talking about how crazy Putin is and how off the rails he is, and then they don't take him seriously when he says, "I may nuke you."
Yeah.
It's just like,
It's pretty wild.
what is wrong with you? And I really think that, it's one of the things, one of the failures that people have. They think that other people are just like them. It's one of the reasons for naivete in Christians, because Christians think that other people are going to have the same kind of heart, same kind of attitude that they have. And when they find somebody that is totally and completely unscrupulous, they are just in shock about the whole thing. And it's like they've been out of the world too long. They don't realize how people act. When they find a Christian doing it, they're really in shock about the whole thing, because they don't know that there's phonies and fakes. And it's and again, what they're doing is they're projecting themselves onto the person that they're dealing with. Well, that's what you have in politics. One of the things that I've noticed about specifically the Democrat Party, and if you're Democrat, I'm not doing this to tweak you. I'm just not giving these guys cover anymore. They do awful things all the time. They're wicked. And, obviously not every single one of them. I guess there's Joe Manchin in West Virginia, but, I don't know. Why are you in that party is what I'd be asking. But in any case, I can tell what a Democrat's doing by what he accuses other people of doing. It's just amazing how many times you got some Democrat politician accusing somebody of something, and then 2 weeks later it comes out it's exactly what they're doing. It's just craziness. And so, I'm not a guy who just loves politicians in general. I know some politicians that are really good guys and really neat ladies, and they love the Lord and stuff, and thank God for them. But that is an area that is it is just flooded with ego.
Yeah.
And
so
you got that going on. You got all kinds of mess.
Are you young enough or old enough, however you want to phrase it, to remember Cold War tensions?
Oh yeah.
So compare that to now. Is it same, worse, better, as far as intensity?
No, this is radically intense.
Worse than Cold War tensions?
Oh yes. And Cold War tensions. It was the kind of when Reagan got into office, one of the things that he did, the previous presidents, one president specifically, had allowed the military to deteriorate. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we didn't even have updated equipment and that kind of stuff. Yes, that's usually the norm. What happens
that's the MO.
Yeah, the Democrats get in office and they want to take the defense budget and use it for something that will get them elected again. And it's payouts basically. And so what happened was we're in a situation when Reagan comes into office where the Russians were dominating as far as military hardware and that kind of thing. And so one of the things that Reagan did was he started updating all of America's military equipment, the materiel, right? So he's updating these things, and there was a window of opportunity for the Russians to do a first strike on us and take us out. If they didn't take the window, then we were going to become the premier military on the planet once again. And so there's this period of time that where this was going on, and it was at the very same time that you had a bunch of people who were leftists once again over in Europe screaming that we needed to disarm, and it's exactly what the Soviets would have loved us to do, because they could do anything that they wanted at that point. And Reagan held his ground, and famously he was mocked for Star Wars and that kind of thing. Star Wars is what brought the Soviet Union down, because they realized that they were never going to be able to. We passed that threshold, and they realized that they were never going to be able to keep up with us, and it ended up causing the Russians to come to the table as far as the Cold War went. And not too long after that, you had the fall of the Soviet Union. They fell apart from the inside out. And so during the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, it was a scary time. But it wasn't something that was necessarily overt coming from the Russians. Although they've always done that, but it wasn't as overt as this, where they're talking about we could do a first strike right now. It was never like this, and
So on that note, do you think that Putin coming back to the table, like you just mentioned, where they realized that they had to do that, do you think that there's a way that we can get him to come back now, or some kind of reasonable ground between the EU and him? Because one thing I've been waiting for is he turned off the power switch to Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, I think they thought he was bluffing. Hey, pay me in rubles or I'm turning off the switch. Oh, you can't do that or whatever. And 1 month payment late, cocoon, shut off. And they're like, well, wait a minute. It's like,
Right, yeah.
that's what he said he was going to do.
Right.
And you didn't pay him. And he turned. And so it doesn't look like he's backing down. But how do you get back to the middle ground?
I don't know if you do. How are you going to do that?
Right.
This guy wants to go in and conquer Ukraine. So what are you going to do with that? And I don't think that it's right to allow Russia to just walk in and conquer Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to do something to help them. But, a bunch of Democrats going over to Ukraine and proclaiming that we're in a war with Russia is a pretty stupid thing to do in a situation like this.
Saying boots, we want boots on the ground.
Yeah, it's like, what is wrong with you?
Okay, so the elephant in the room. Do you think that this could potentially be the World War III scenario that the book of Revelation talks about?
Not this, but what happens right after this could be. And so what the Bible says in Ezekiel 38 is that God's going to take and turn them around and draw them back and bring them down to the land of Israel. The World War III situation that the Bible talks about is Russia uniting itself with Turkey and Iran and Libya and Ethiopia and something called Gomer, and going down and attacking Israel. This very well could be a precursor to that whole thing, because it looks like in that passage that Russia is going a certain direction. God stops them, turns them around, and brings them down. And so anytime Russia's on the move, I'm paying attention to this whole thing. And I've never seen Russia attack anyone until modern times, until they went into Georgia and they went into Crimea a few years ago, and in both those instances, they went in. They went in to take territory. They're doing the same thing with Ukraine right now, and so when we had the Cold War, the reason it was called the Cold War is because you had proxy wars going on. So Vietnam was Russia against the United States. United States was on the ground in Vietnam. They had Russian advisors in North Vietnam and even in South Vietnam, but they didn't have Russian troops there. The Russians didn't send their troops. And now the Russians are just on the move, and they want territory. And obviously he wants Ukraine. And so what are you going to do to stop him? And again, on top of this whole thing, he's a guy who's got nuclear weapons. And so it would be conducive to the survival of other countries to pay attention to what you're doing and do this carefully. And I don't think that Ukraine should just be abandoned. But on the other hand, some of the stuff that the Democrats are doing, and what I'm talking about is Schiff and Pelosi going to Ukraine and making these statements. They don't have to pay for what they're going to do. The ones who are going to have to pay is my kids, your kids, everybody who is going to end up going to war over this whole thing if they get us into a war, and again with a nuclear state. So it would be, this is one of those times where diplomacy in my view would be something that you best pay attention to. And I think that a lot of times what's happening with again the Democrats that are in office right now is they're acting like hawks because they don't think that they're going to have to pay the cost for this, because that's how they live. They go through life doing things, they never have to pay the cost for it. And again, this is something that's absolutely different. Here's another thing. They're talking about the guy's crazy and can do anything that he wants to. There's rumors right now that he's got cancer and he's under a doctor's care for this whole thing. So now you got a dictator who is nutso, according to the Democrats. He's a crazy guy. He does anything that he pleases, and now he's got no reason not to, because he may be terminal.
Yep, nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose. So, wow. This is pretty wild. You know, I put out on my Facebook page not too long ago, just a statement specifically that I wrote to my friends, many of whom I grew up with, who I've witnessed to over the years about the last days, and just told them, you know what, I have never seen anything like this, anything that could come close to being something that would launch you into what we call World War III, and what the Bible calls an attack that is going to end up killing a quarter of the people on the planet. That's how the book of the tribulation starts, according to the book of Revelation. A quarter of the people on the planet die. And so this is one of those situations that easily could go that direction. And if you're an unbeliever and you know anything about this stuff, it's time to pay attention.
You know, it's an overwhelm. See, it's not just end times World War III. It's the rise of tyranny, the rise of a one world government, the rise of a ability to pick people by person and control them and what they buy or sell. And there's this, I mean, just with macro and cryptocurrencies, like every area that the Bible points to that
anti-Christian sentiment, persecution, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, mandates, all that stuff. Like everything the Bible talks about is on the rise.
Yeah,
like we've never seen before.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Okay, last thing. Did you happen to catch, I haven't seen him in a long time, I don't follow him that much, but Trump did an interview with Piers Morgan, asking, and Piers, you know Piers, he's kind of like the European in-your-face guy, and he sits down with Trump, and I'm paraphrasing, but Trump just basically tells him, he's like, we're all going to get blown to pieces.
Like, I didn't see that part. I saw some other parts of that interview.
Yeah, he's asking, well, what would you do? What would you tell Putin? And how is Biden handling this? And he's like, basically said, we're all just going to get blown up over this. It was quite comical, but it was Trump's style, and it's interesting to hear his perspective. But definitely exciting times, not time to be messing around if you're.
This is one of those times I would, if I had my druthers, I would never have anybody like Biden in the White House. Never. And never have anybody like whoever's running Biden in the White House. These people have no clue about what they're doing. And again, it's scary, you know, and I don't know. You know, the Bible talks about the fact that if you don't want to follow God, that God leaves you to your own devices, and the man who says in his heart that he doesn't believe in God is a fool. And so we got fools running things, and so this is pretty scary times. Not for me.
We're like, sweet, we're going home.
Yeah,
let's get out of here.
You nuke me, that's rapture to me.
Yeah, amen.
You know,
someone get this party started.
Yeah, I don't even know that's going to be the case. Rapture may happen right before any of those things fall. So
yeah. All right. What does it mean when it says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice?
Jesus is talking in Matthew, let's see, that's Matthew chapter 9. And it says this, it happened, this is in verse 10, it says, it happened as Jesus sat at the table in the house, that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? When Jesus heard that, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And, you know, obviously what he was saying to these guys is that they needed to have merciful hearts towards people who were in lousy lifestyles. Tax collectors were in lousy lifestyles. Jesus was reaching out to people who ungodly, and that's the point that he's making there. They're like people who are sick; they need a physician. Another time that Jesus said that is over in Matthew chapter 12, and what was happening was the disciples were walking through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and they began to pluck heads of grain and ate it. And the Pharisees saw it, and they thought that was work, and they said, your disciples are doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath. And so Jesus schooled them on the Sabbath and what's lawful and what's not. And then he says, verse 7, but if you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And so again, an unmerciful heart. But this is what's going to really explain it to you. And this is it comes from the book of Hosea. Jesus in both places is quoting from Hosea chapter 6 in verse 6. And I'm going to read a little earlier so you understand the context. It says, O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, and like the early dew it goes away. Therefore I've hewn them by the prophets, I've slain them by the words of my mouth, and your judgments are like light that goes forth. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But like men, they transgress the covenant. There they dealt treacherously with me. Gilead is a city of evildoers and defiled with blood, as bands of robbers lie in wait for a man, so the company of priests murder on the way to Shechem. So priests are murdering people, is what he's saying here. Surely they commit lewdness. I've seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. There is the harlotry of Ephraim. Israel is defiled. Also, Judah, a harvest is appointed for you when I return the captives of my people. And so basically what was happening in these situations is there was an outward profession of a walk with God, and even works that went with it. Sacrifices are works. And so they are giving sacrifices, and they're giving burnt offerings. And God said, I'd rather have mercy than your sacrifice. In other words, don't kill people, don't rob people, don't commit lewdness and harlotry. I'd rather have mercy than your sacrifice, and I'd rather have a relationship with God, the knowledge of God, rather than burnt offerings. So these are people who are offering burnt offerings, and they have no knowledge of God. They're offering sacrifices, and they don't have a merciful heart. They'll rip off anybody that they want to. And that's exactly the same thing that you had with the Pharisees in the New Testament. So the best passage to explain that is Hosea 6.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, my next question has to do with fasting. And they says, if Jesus said that the disciples should fast after he is taken away, how come we don't see fasting as common today as it was in the early church, and how important is it to ministry?
Well, this is one of those things that I think needs to be more personal than societal. I fast all the time, so anytime that I'm praying seriously about something, I fast, and it's because I've read the New Testament, and I've read the passages that you're talking about, and so I take them seriously. And so when I'm seeking the Lord on something, I take some time and I fast over it. Had a period of time when my daughter was in a situation that was kind of life and death spiritually, and I fasted for weeks for her. And it's because I wanted God to do cool things in her life, and He did. He turned things around radically. And so I think that if God's convicting you about the whole issue of fasting, that maybe that's something that you should do, because it's good. And when you're talking about fasting, fasting doesn't make God do something, doesn't twist His arm. I'm going to fast now. God, I'm not going to eat until you give me what I want. Or that's not the point behind it. Point behind fasting is, instead of let me put it in terms that I would speak to myself. And instead of feeding my face, I'm focusing on Jesus. And it's like a real focus on the Lord at that point. And that's what I'm doing when I'm fasting. So every time I'm getting hungry, it's a reminder of prayer. And so, it's that kind of thing, and it's a good spiritual discipline. It's a great thing to do, as long as you don't make it some kind of legalistic type thing, because it's not, fasting isn't going to change your flesh. It's not something that can change your nature, but it is something where you're getting a focus on God. It's kind of like going to a ministry retreat, or to a men's retreat, or to a woman's retreat. What you're doing is you're taking time and you're getting alone with the Lord and you're paying attention to Him. You do that, you're going to get answers, because God said, if you seek me, you'll find me if you search for me with all your heart. And fasting is a part of that whole thing. And so, yeah, I think people should fast. And like I said, I do that routinely. I know that I don't look like it, but I do that routinely. So,
All right. My next question comes from Acts chapter 6, verse 15. And it says, in that passage, what does it mean when it says Stephen's face became like an angel? And I jumped ahead a little bit, but this is when Stephen is seized, and he's basically given the Holy Spirit to give testimony before these guys. And then it comes to the point in verse 15, it says, all who sat in the council looking steadfastly at him saw his face as the face of an angel. What's that talking about?
Well, it could be a number of things. It could be that Stephen's face was beatific, which means, peaceful and settled and lovely in that kind of sense, and glow in the sense of something that looks beautiful. Somebody who's standing there being accused and is in danger of losing their life. And so peace that passes understanding is maybe what it's talking about, or it might be the kind of thing where his face might actually have glowed. So Moses coming down from the mountain after he had been in the presence of God, his face literally glowed to the point where he put a veil on so that the people wouldn't be so impressed with what was going on with his face. It may have been something like that. But I kind of think it was just the peace of God on his face, and it was something that was noticeable and out of character for anybody that was in Stephen's situation. And obviously we know the end of the story. What they do is they kill him because of it, and he ends up doing the same thing that Jesus says does on the cross when he says, Father, don't count this sin against them. Lord, don't charge them with this sin. And when he said this, he fell asleep, is what the passage says in Luke 7:60 or Acts 7:60. So I kind of think that's what it means, and that's my opinion on it. There's nothing in the Greek there that specifically points out what's going on. Could be a number of things.
I came across the same phraseology or description when I read a biography on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he knew he was basically going to hang for being a Christian right at the end of the war. I mean, Americans are coming in; it's right on that verge, and Hitler gave a order to execute everybody because he knew it was the last time he was going to get to kill them. And the soldiers and the testimony, the eyewitnesses around him said that he was at total peace.
Yeah.
Walking there like almost with a badge of honor, knowing that he was going to go home to be with the Lord.
Yeah, can you imagine? 10 minutes I'm in heaven.
Yeah.
It's you take the scripture seriously, the promises of God seriously. That's what you've got.
Yeah.
Somebody told me, I don't know, puts a gun to my head and says, I'm going to kill you. It's like, you mean you're going to promote me? That's what that is. It's like, I'm talking big right now, but it's like I fully think that the Holy Spirit would give me the power to do that. In fact, when I had COVID, when I was in the hospital, it's saying things are getting worse, and they're putting me on bigger and bigger oxygen machines and that kind of stuff. And I was like totally at peace. I was like, God, you want to take me this way? That's fine with me. Off we go. So, yeah, I don't know.
All right. Let's do this one. It's in Exodus 21.
Okay.
And Basically, they want a solid apologetics for Exodus 21, verses 20 through 22, when sharing with skeptics. And, there's some stuff going on here. I don't know if you want to read the passage first.
Okay, let me look at this real quick here.
And I can read it if you want.
Yeah, 20 through 22. If a man beats his male or female servant, okay, that's not where you want to start right off the bat. Where you want to start on this is in verse 18. It says, if men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. If a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. If men fight and hurt a woman, we're going through verse 22?
That's what it quoted,
Okay.
yeah.
If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, you need verse 23 with that.
Yeah.
If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Let me go on with this because the whole section goes together.
Okay.
If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. Okay? And it goes on to talk about oxen goring people and that kind of stuff. These are expansions on the sixth commandment, which is you shall not murder. And it's talking about law where somebody has obviously had the intention of hurting somebody, and in that intent they kill someone. And what was supposed to happen is if you killed somebody and you had the intent to hurt them, you got the death penalty. And so we do first degree murder, we do second degree murder, we do manslaughter, we do all this kind of stuff. This would be second degree murder in the sense that you didn't start off to kill somebody, but you got in a conflict with them and they ended up dying. If you look up in verse 18, if men contend with each other and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but is confined to his bed, if he rises again, see that word rises there? It means to stand. If he stands again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. Acquitted from what? And it's the idea of the death penalty. So he's not going to be put to death because the guy didn't die. And so he's acquitted for that. He shall only pay for the loss of his time and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. And so you had to provide for his health care and for his lost wages. You didn't get pain and suffering in Old Testament law. It was health care and it was lost wages. Then it goes on and talks about that kind of situation with a male or a female servant. And it says, if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Well, what's the punishment for killing somebody made in the image of God? And it's death. And so if you killed your male or female servant, you got put to death. That's the punishment that you have there. If men, notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. That is not saying if he remains alive and dies after a day or two. That is another word that's used. It's a word that means to stand. And so basically what you have is Moses, when he's writing this, uses one word for stand when he's talking about two men who aren't related by the master-slave relationship. And he just uses another word for stand when he's talking about the master-slave thing. It means exactly the same thing. In fact, let me just do this in the NLT. This is sometimes it's a clearer translation. And I'm gonna read both of these. Now, suppose two men quarrel, and one hits the other with a stone or fist, and the injured person does not die, but is confined to bed. If he's later able to walk outside again, that's that phrase, if he's able to stand, if he's later able to walk outside again, even with a crutch, the assailant will not be punished, but must compensate his victim for lost wages and provide for his full recovery. That's the only punishment he gets. Then this is verse 20. If a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. And again, the punishment is the death penalty. But if the slave recovers within a day or two, and that word recovers there is stand again. If the slave recovers within a day or two, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property. And what that's talking about is the punishment for injuring somebody in a fight in the first instance and in a disciplined situation in the second instance would be loss of pay and health care. Okay? And so if the person is owned by you, if he's your property, then you're already feeding him, you're already housing him, and you're already providing health care for him because they're your servant. And so you're going to make sure that they get well. If they die in that situation, the penalty is death for the owner. And so he's going to take care of them in that situation. And if they don't die, then he's already been punished. He's lost the wages. He's basically lost the work, the labor that guy would be able to do. And he's had to pay for his housing and his health care and his food. And so that's the reason that the owner was not punished in that instance. It's because he was already his property. And so he's already incurred a loss because he went over the top with these guys. Now, is that good?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. In the next one, it goes on. And by the way, in the New King James Version, when it translates it, if he remains alive a day or two, it's just the word remains. If he remains a day or two, and remains is a possible translation for that word, but it's not the one that's used the most often. Most often it's the word stands. And so in both instances, the guys are said to stand after they've been injured. And it means the same thing. So different words, same thing. In verse 22, it says, if men fight and hurt a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. And so the harm following is that the woman dies or the child dies. And in that case, it's a life. And so if the child is born prematurely and dies, then the man gets the death penalty. That's what the teaching is here. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If the child is injured in the birth because of the premature birth, then there was a penalty that was exacted for that. They didn't go out, go around and poke out eyes and rip out teeth. What they did was they gave you a monetary payment for that. And you can see that later on in the passage. And so eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If the woman is hurt, then there would be a monetary payment that was made to make sure that the woman was compensated. And so he shall pay as the judges determine in verse 22 is talking about that situation. And so whether it was the man or whether it was the woman who was hurt or died, or the child was hurt or died, there would be a penalty for the person who hurt a woman with child. And so that's just pretty straightforward. Abortion in this culture was murder. And so you abort a child, that's a child that's been born prematurely because of a fight, it was considered to be murder and you would be put to death for it. You can see God's attitude towards this whole thing by what happens with slaves when they get injured and the injury is a lasting injury. In verse 26, it says, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. And the idea behind that is these people, and you have to know this because of the rules on slavery in Israel. You could put yourself into slavery for 7 years, basically, and you went for that period of time, and then you went free. And so basically, what you're doing is you're making yourself an indentured servant, and they're paying for your room and board, but they're getting the benefit of your labor for that period of time. Well, labor costs something, and so, gosh, if you took if you took and say the guy'd been his servant for 6 years or for 1 year, and you took and knocked out his tooth, so what is that? That's let me do the math here. I'm an employer, so 20.
How much is my tooth worth there, boss?
2080 times 10 equals 20,800 times 6 equals, you got $124,800 for a tooth.
Do you want to knock my tooth out?
So that's basically it.
Yeah.
And so God cares more about the persons than he does about the master's profit.
Yeah. And I'm reading the NLT. It says the slave should be released in payment for the tooth, like you're talking about. But here's what happens. The skeptic, the secular humanist, however they're coming from, they read these passages. They have no idea the culture.
Right.
They have no idea the context. They just read, oh, well, if you do that to your slave, you can treat him however you want because he's your property. No, that's exactly not what it's saying.
Right.
That if you were to kill him, that guy is to be put to death via capital punishment. And we live in a culture that is okay with abortion. And even like in our state, when you have a murderer that's convicted, oh, well, let's not even go there. We don't believe in capital punishment.
Right.
They're less rowdy than God is about this.
Right.
At the same time, they're condemning him, not understanding the context.
Right. It's free room and board for murderers.
Yeah.
And so, if I murder you, you're my employee. You're like my slave. And so I murder you. The most I'm going to get in our state is free room and board and weightlifting privileges for the rest of my life.
Yep. Cable TV and everything.
Yeah.
And probably, maybe out in your lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the possibility of parole. And that's, God's dealing with masters more radically than we would ever treat somebody who, again, I'm the employer, you're the employee. If I did any of this stuff to you, then, it would be something where I would get treated worse in a more radical situation by God than by the state of Washington.
Yep.
So, yeah, that whole attitude is just nothing but nonsense. So,
okay, hopefully that clears up your answer and helps you to discuss people that are, going down that road, being antagonistic towards the Old Testament, or however you want to put it.
yeah.
We're out of time for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you were blessed today. Thanks for hanging out with us and going through the Word. If you have questions, you guys can send them to me via email, crosswalkradio@gmail.com. Text me, 707-872-7677. Pastor Steve's going through 1 Peter on Sunday mornings. We're going to go through marriage here coming up, so would love to have you and your spouse come on out and be blessed by that. I gave the service times at the beginning. You guys can download our app, get on our website. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next Wednesday, True Set Free at 3:30. God bless you guys.